And we're live. Welcome to another Couch GM podcast. Today it's going to be a good one. We're going to be having on Midwinter, who's a attorney at Kenny Hertz Perry LLC, talking about. So he specializes in NIL attorney, sports law, business litigation. We're going to be talking about the downfall of the Pac-12, some of the legal battles that are currently going on. But before we get him on, we're going to discuss a little bit. Yesterday, the University of Washington filed a motion. Essentially a tweet from Nicole Eyerbach, who's a reporter for The Athletic, stated that lawyers representing the University of Washington yesterday filed a motion to intervene in the legal proceedings between Washington State, Oregon State, and the Pac-12 conference. Essentially, and then the 9 outgoing Pac-12 schools filed a brief to support UW and support its motion to dismiss. They also wrote that they've entered into a mediation process with Washington State and Oregon State that is currently ongoing and scheduled through October. So essentially, University of Washington and the remaining schools that have left are trying to dismiss this case that Washington State and Oregon State are putting on against them. So, Dylan, what are your comments that you've seen?
Obviously this was a move to try and avoid the discovery phase for as long as possible, where, essentially both parties agree that they're going to try and figure out some sort of mediation. But in all honesty, well, you don't really expect Oregon State and Washington State to really get screwed over in any measure when it comes to that. So it's gonna be interesting to talk to Mitt and hear his take about, how soon this could get to discovery if mediation kind of drags out.
And we have Midwinter on now, so we'll go ahead and bring him in. Perfect. So he's a attorney at Kenny Hertz Perry LLC. So first off, Mitt, thank you for taking the time tonight.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, guys.
So first off, if we could just have you basically overview from your professional perspective with what's going on in the Pac-12, the litigation that has taken place so far, and where you might see this headed.
It's a pretty unprecedented situation. With in conference realignment, with 2 members being left in a conference, then suing that conference that they're still a member of. Basically to have control over what is left of the conference. I'm not surprised that Oregon State and Washington State took that approach. If I was in their shoes, I would probably do the same thing. But it's just a very unusual situation. Usually in conference realignment, when lawsuits are filed or lawsuits are threatened, it is a situation where a few schools leave a conference, and then the conference might threaten to sue those schools, or might threaten to sue the conference that the departing schools are going to. But I can't ever think of another situation where the remaining schools have sued the conference and their commissioner of the conference that they remain in when all the other schools are leaving the conference. So it's a really unusual situation.
Mitt, do you feel like this is something that the other 10 schools just did not expect or just plan for in their doomsday, look at conference realignment?
Yeah, I obviously don't know what they were thinking what would happen when they left, but I assume they didn't think that Oregon State and Washington State would sue the conference and the commissioner to basically have control of the conference, alleging that the 10 members that left were in breach of the conference bylaws at the time they announced they were going to leave next year. I think they probably also thought that Oregon State and Washington State would end up in another conference, most likely, Big 12 or whatever conference that would have been. So I probably think that they assumed that those 2 schools would find a landing spot. So that probably played into some of their decision making as well. But yeah, I highly doubt that they thought that they would find themselves in the litigation that they're in now.
Mitt, can you kind of explain what UW, with the lawsuit that they just filed, or the restraining order, to me and to most football fans who, we can be a little bit blockheaded at times. And sometimes when you have big words like erroneous and stuff like that getting thrown around, it can get a little bit confusing. It really turns into that meme of like, cool story, I'm happy for you, or sorry that happened. Can you kind of explain it like I am an idiot to me and to all the fans about what UW did and how that's going to affect the litigation moving forward?
Yeah, so what UW filed is a motion to intervene. So right now, the only parties in the lawsuit are Oregon State, Washington State are the plaintiffs, and the defendants are the Pac-12 and the commissioner. So UW and the other 9 schools that are leaving are not actual parties to the lawsuit. So what UW filed is called a motion to intervene. They want to intervene to become a party in the lawsuit. And basically they're arguing that they should be allowed to intervene as a party in the lawsuit because no one involved in the lawsuit, especially the conference and the commissioner, are not adequately going to represent UW's interest, because they're saying this lawsuit affects us. It's going to have an effect on us. And there's no one that's currently a party in the lawsuit that's going to adequately represent our interests in this lawsuit. And so in addition to that, they filed their motion to intervene. And then assuming that gets granted, they also filed a proposed motion to dismiss the lawsuit for a number of reasons. So they're hoping that the court, number one, allows them to intervene in the lawsuit as a party. And then number 2, grants their motion to dismiss the entire lawsuit.
And what they said, too, was the crux of the Pac-10 case is that the Pac-2 are using an erroneous interpretation of the Pac-12 bylaws per court docs. So is it kind of like a he said, she said type thing here over the bylaws?
Yeah, so that's really kind of, assuming it gets to the merits of the case, that's really what the heart of the case is about, is what do the Pac-12 bylaws say? So Oregon State and Washington State are taking the position that the 10 schools that announced they're leaving have breached the conference bylaws because they announced they're leaving prior to August 1, 2024. The other schools that have left are taking the position that they have to actually announce they're going to leave before August 1, 2024 to be in breach of the bylaws. So they're saying we would have had to say we are leaving the conference now or tomorrow, sometime before August 1, 2024 to actually be in breach of the bylaws. So it's going to be, they're asking the court to interpret those bylaws, and Oregon State and Washington State are taking one position. The other schools are taking an opposite position.
Yeah, so Washington.
Sorry, Connor. Talk about the precedent, though, also in this case, where obviously, prior USC and UCLA were the first 2 schools to leave, and then essentially the Pac decided to keep them out of board matters as well as Colorado. Can you explain just the precedent that's going on with those 3 schools that announced their early movement before the Pac blew up?
Yeah, from what I understand, when those 3 schools announced that they were leaving the Pac-12, they were no longer involved in the decision-making for the conference. And I'm not sure whether that was something that was official, that the conference told them they can no longer be part of the meetings, or if they just sort of, out of common sense, decided, hey, we're just going to sit these meetings out and let you guys decide the fate of the conference, how the conference is going to operate going forward, because we're no longer going to be part of the conference. But under that same precedence, kind of what you're getting at, if the 10 schools that are leaving, if they follow the same precedence that was set there, they would sit out the board meetings and let Oregon State and Washington State, determine the fate of the conference going forward.
And can you explain the process, both with mediation and then discovery? Because it sounds like UW is wanting to enter into a mediation process with Washington State and Oregon State in an attempt to avoid discovery. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's actually mediation's already going on amongst all the schools. So in mediation, there's a mediator, and in this case, it's a retired judge, which is pretty common. And so the mediator's job is to try and reach some sort of resolution or settlement for the parties to agree on. And as part of that, the lawsuit gets dismissed. Each side goes their own way. But they sign a settlement agreement. It says, Oregon State, Washington State, you get this, or the other schools, you get this. So they're already involved in that process. And so that process can go on concurrently with litigation, and it usually does. So just because there's mediation doesn't mean there's not going to be discovery. You can have both things going on at the same time.
Yeah, and there was a deadline. Obviously, October 13th was a discovery deadline. So I guess how does this mediation, does that push that back in terms of, because obviously these universities do not want discovery to happen and have that dirty laundry spill out into the public sphere.
No, the mediation is not going to have any effect on the discovery process. That's going to be, so right now, I think on November 14th, there's a hearing on the preliminary injunction. And a lot of times courts will stay discovery until they rule on that preliminary injunction motion. I haven't looked at the docket on this case to see if the court put in a stay of discovery until it rules on that motion. I assume it probably has. So the hearing on that motion is November 14th. There's also a hearing on October 25th, assuming that UW, its motion to intervene gets granted. It wants to have a motion on its a hearing on its motion to dismiss on October 25th. So I think once those two motions get settled, whether the court grants or denies them, then at that point, that's probably when discovery would happen. And when a hearing on those types of things takes place, you can take a few weeks or even a month for a court to rule on those types of motions and draft its order on that. So I would guess the discovery could maybe happen, early December, sometime around there.
So it sounds like then that this has a possibility of extending out, 6 months even further, depending on how far these universities want to take it. Is there a chance that this isn't solved within, the next year or so when a lot of these teams are leaving to join their new conference? And if that's the case, how does that affect all of this? Can, that money go back to Oregon State and Washington State if they win this, but they win it 2 years from now? How does that work?
Yeah, it's possible it could drag on that long. I assume that, both sides would want to have this whole thing resolved before that point, but assuming that the litigation drags on past the date of August 1, 2024, and the other schools have left, theoretically, I think that the assets of the conference would still, be with the conference. And if we assume that Oregon State and Washington State end up winning, and then at that point gain control over the conference and its assets, then they could do with those assets what they want to do.
I think you're pretty unbiased as anybody. I think you played your college ball at William and Mary, so back out east.
Yep.
Who do you think, from your point of view, holds the most leverage in this case moving forward? If you can kind of give us maybe some sort of crystal ball outlook.
That's a good one. I actually think that the argument on what the bylaws say, I think, to find out what you guys want to hear, but I think the departing members actually have the better argument there. Because it doesn't necessarily make sense that if you announce that, let's say you announce you're going to leave the conference in 2 years, but you don't actually leave until that date you're allowed to leave. To me, that's not a scenario where you're breaching the bylaws. I agree with the argument that you're only breaching the bylaws if you actually leave the conference before whatever date it is.
So even these tweets on upcoming schedules with the Big 12. Each school had their, Cal and Stanford, welcome to the ACC, all these public tweets and so on and so forth via social media, and even letters to alumni associations within those schools. You don't think merit that?
It's possible. I'd have to see all that stuff. I haven't seen all that stuff that you just referred to. There probably could be some things out there that Oregon State and Washington State could point to and say, yeah, this is something that rises to the level of breaching the bylaws. So I'm not saying that Oregon State and Washington State don't have any arguments in their favor. In litigation like this, you never know what's going to happen, and a lot of other evidence and discovery, if it gets to that point, could come out that we aren't aware that exists right now.
Is this is this just like a winner take all thing, or like what would happen if, say, the court found 5 of the schools had breached the contract but 4 hadn't, or whatever the numbers on that is? Is this a situation kind of where like you have to have all of them breach the contract, or could could Oregon State and Washington State win this lawsuit against half of the schools, and then the other half, it's like, well, technically they didn't meet that threshold, so then they don't have to pay out, or they get their money back or some of their assets back from the Pac-12? How does that work?
Yeah, I think something like that could be possible. And so then if we imagine a scenario where 5 schools didn't breach and 5 schools did, and so that would leave 7 schools in the Pac-12, then I guess those 7 schools would be the ones that control the assets and have the board meetings and decide what happens going forward with the conference. I think the most likely scenario is, though, there's a settlement. The assets get divided up in some manner, probably with Oregon State and Washington State getting a large portion of those assets. The schools that are leaving get, some smaller amount of those assets. And then I think there's also a question of what happens to the NCAA basketball tournament units, because those extend out for a few years. Right. And then what happens if a team makes the CFP this year? So you still have some, undetermined financial numbers. So even if there is a settlement, there's probably going to be that settlement agreement will have to be in effect for a while to kind of figure out what's going to happen with some of the finances that haven't really happened yet.
Right.
And then can you discuss briefly about sovereign immunity and how that would affect these things?
Yeah, so sovereign immunity, it's a legal doctrine that makes it difficult to sue states, which includes state officials and state institutions like public universities. And sovereign immunity law, it's different from state to state. Some states, you can sue state entities for breach of contract. Some have different ways you have to sue them for breach of contract. In some states, you can't sue a state entity at all for breach of contract, like Texas. You can't sue the state universities at all. Like if you're familiar with the Mike Leach Texas Tech case, they were able to get his lawsuit just completely dismissed because he was not able to actually sue Texas Tech as a state entity under Texas law. I don't think any of the states involved in this case have that strict of sovereign immunity law like Texas does. But there will probably be different arguments made by the departing schools about why they can't be sued, or if they can be sued, different steps that need to be taken before litigation can actually occur.
And I had an interesting question just on where law firms rank, and obviously the law firm that Oregon State and Washington State have are Keeker, Van Ness, and Peters. I don't know if you're able to kind of elaborate on where they're at in the law stratosphere, if you've even heard of them, and kind of just give us an idea of like, hey, are they like the Notre Dame law firm, or are they like the Buffalo?
Yeah, they're a very legit law firm. So I used to live in San Francisco for 10 years, where I went to law school, and I practiced law out there for about 8 years, and that's where they're located. Very good reputation. They're, like, numbers-wise, they're not a big firm in terms of the number of attorneys they have. They're a boutique firm, but they're very well known, very good attorneys. So they're a very legit law firm. So you should feel good about having them on your side.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate your time with explaining everything, giving us some insight on behind the scenes from your perspective with you being in the field. So again, really appreciate your time. Looking forward to staying up to date on the hearings as we see them moving forward.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate
Hey,
it.
appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Mitt.
Yeah. Nice to meet y'all.
All right. We'll see you.
Good night.
Awesome. So we got some insight from Mitt. Really interesting to hear his perspective on some of those topics. Specifically that from his perspective, he thinks that the departing schools might have the upper hand or have a strong case with what they're arguing because technically they didn't leave the conference, as he stated, which might not be breaching the Pac-12 bylaws, which is interesting.
Well, we need to find another lawyer to bring on. So
It's shocking to me, and I'm sure it will be for you too, Dylan and Connor, that the tweets and the schedule making technically don't necessarily constitute leaving the conference. It's basically like being with your girlfriend and going, "Don't worry, babe, I'm still with you. I just have Tinder for when I'm not with you here in about a year."
Yeah, I'm just
a bad analogy.
I'm leaving you next year on this certain date.
Right.
I'll be with this conference, moving forward, but not yet.
Is
But
this
also-
what Leo does? He's like, "Hey, your 25th birthday is May 25th. You got one more year with me, and I'm on Tinder or Raya or whatever, and then I'm out of here."
But I think also an important thing to note too is it matters what the judge thinks too at the end of the day. And obviously, it doesn't hurt to have a Whitman County judge on it and B, a former Coug who's a judge. So the name is forsaken me. I'll look that up as we're talking here right now.
And also in that Coug fan article, it was Bill Kirk, who they cited, a prominent Seattle attorney is what they said, former King County deputy prosecutor and WC graduate. He said they called the motion that UW submitted yesterday appalling and said for the University of Washington to suggest that neither WSU or OSU are likely to prevail on this argument. And then to worse yet, to argue that neither of those institutions can show irreparable harm by what has occurred in this conference tells you everything you need to know about the integrity of the University of Washington moving forward. So
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And Oregon State already came out publicly, their president stating that they expect to not have 44% of the budget or revenue, I should say, that they had this past year. So if losing nearly half of your revenue isn't irreparable harm, I don't know what is.
And so the other day I heard the Baylor athletic director saying that currently the Big 12 is not in talks with WSU and OSU. It could just be he doesn't know anything about it, or it could just be that some of the rumors that we have heard in the past are just not true and that the Big 12 is not engaging with these schools. So I'm pretty intrigued to see what it would look like if Washington State and Oregon State really do become the Pac-12 for the next couple of years and they become basically independents, create their own schedules. They have the reins on their destiny to get into the playoffs as well as the control over the assets.
I thought it was interesting that this could go on for multiple years too, right? It doesn't seem like that's what the schools are going to want to do, but if they really want to dig their heels in, this thing could go on for a year or two. And then how do you backtrack everything? How do you back pay? How do you if Wazoo and Oregon State treat it like they're going to win and they use that money and then they don't get it and they have to pay back, the other schools, how does that work? It boggles my mind how something, and not a lawyer, never went to law school, never been even in the same building as law being practiced. How you can look at something like this, to me that seems so black and white of they're leaving, they weren't supposed to leave, they don't get to make decisions on the conference now that they have decided to leave, yet there's a way for them to still say, well, technically we didn't leave, so we get to have a say in this money. And even though we've already ousted people before, because we're leaving and the leaving crew is the majority, we get to have final say on where this money is. That boggles my mind.
Because from my understanding of the bylaws, it's that you announce that you're leaving. It's not that you leave. I need to see if the bylaws are actual public information and go and actually read every single page of that.
Right.
But from what I've seen from people's interpretation so far, is that announcing to leave before that date on 2024 is what's the breaking point.
But a tweet isn't announcing. That's
no,
where,
yeah, my
tweeting
perspective is
isn't
like
announcing.
Yeah, all the
Schedules
conferences,
isn't announcing.
Right?
How is that not announcing that you're leaving to me? Asking donors for more money because you're leaving. It's stuff like that to me. That's how is that not leaving?
Dylan, you referenced alumni being sent messages.
Yeah, there's a few of the Pac-12 schools that just sent out, like, and it's your typical just like alumni mass email, that everybody's getting, in terms of, hey, we joined the Big 12. Hey, we joined the Big 10. Hey, we joined the ACC. And I think the whole goal, in my mind, I think the whole idea of WSU and Oregon State doing this is just to make things extremely tough on all the outbound members, as well as, all the conferences report to the CFP, the College Football Playoff. And under those bylaws, there's got to be any thing to change, any decision, there has to be unanimous consent. And with Kirk Schultz on that board, there's not going to be unanimous consent for 2024 and 2025. So that affects the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, as well as the G5, because the whole talking point right now is next year, is it going to be 6-6 or is it going to be 5-7? 5 automatic qualifiers and then 7 at-larges, or 6-6. So that's something that has been widely reported through Nicole Auerbach and a few others, within the athletic and obviously other prominent college football scribes, stating that there has just been no movement in terms of trying to figure out, how they're going to go about 6-6 or 5-7 with the CFP playoff, beginning to start next year with 12 schools. So, the whole hope, I guess, looping back is, okay, hey, we're going to be a, pebble in your boot, a thorn in your foot until we can get one of these conferences to accept us. And whether that's at a half share rate, 3/4 of a share rate, or Big 12, is the only conference right now that doesn't have their own network, where, you look at it at the basketball side of things, the Pac-12 network brings a lot of value for that conference and being able to have these games on a network. So who knows? A lot's to be said, and we have no idea if the ACC blows up in the next month to 6 months with Florida State, North Carolina, and some of the other, Miami prestigious brands there that are looking to maybe bounce as well, because there's been a lot of smoke. There's smoke every week on this conference realignment.
That's
now there's Gonzaga potentially to the Big 12.
Yeah, that seems like it's almost a done deal, and that's a great point. This is far from over. So if Washington State and Oregon State, it almost kind of seems like if you can hang on, stay independent for a year or two, maybe something opens up later on. It's I hate to be analogy guy. I listened to Colin Cowherd too much when I was a younger kid, but it's like Joe Cronin with Damian Lillard. He waited until a better offer came, and eventually someone got a little more desperate and a better offer came. And so he was able to get better assets back for his star player. It kind of seems like the same thing for Wazoo and Oregon State. Hold on. You never know what's going to happen. If you hold on for a year or two before you have to officially join a conference, what if the ACC does go belly up, right? It's already been made very clear that Clemson, Florida State, those top teams in the ACC, they want to get out. And the SEC wants those teams. if the SEC gets Florida State and you can have Florida State, Miami, and Florida play every year as part of your conference, that's a huge deal. You know, thinking about Alabama playing Clemson every year, that's a huge new tradition that you've created. And you've basically now just taken over the whole South. Well, if that happens, well, now you really can turn into that all coast conference, because guess what? North Carolina State isn't getting picked up. You know, Georgia Tech isn't getting picked up. So you can
Boston
pick up
College,
Oregon.
Syracuse. I mean, those schools aren't going to get picked up, you know?
Exactly. So then you can pick up Oregon State, Washington State, and then is that enough to save yourself and put yourself in, you know, the new Power Four, right?
Yeah, and you never know what those couple remaining AAC brands. I think
Right.
Memphis, Tulane, you know, or even Tulsa. But I think Memphis and Tulane are also, you know, in this kind of same situation that Oregon State and Washington State are in, because they know they're two of the better brands in the G5. So, you know, you never know if Cal and Stanford decide to, you know, piggyback with OSU and WSU, saying, look, we need travel partners, and you know, maybe that's where the UNLVs, the SDSUs, and maybe even Fresno States, you know, kind of get looked at as well. It's just a climate that is changing day to day.
And that's the other thing that you just kind of hit on. This kind of makes sense for football, but for every other sport, you already lose money competing in them, aside from a special few basketball, a special few baseball, and a special fewer volleyball, right? So if you already lose money in these sports, now you're asking them to do these big, long travel weekends where if you're playing baseball, you're gone from Thursday.
Yeah.
Shoot, if you're playing volleyball, if you're playing basketball and you're on the road, you're gone on Thursday. Now you're telling me you got to go across the country and then come back? How are you able to recoup that money, right? In sports and in the universities where you're already trying to figure out a way to recoup revenue that you lost because of the pandemic that we just came out of, and get your student bodies back up to a higher rate, because most of these universities, they lost student enrollment. Student enrollment went down. So how do you build yourself back up, and how do you build up that money? I don't think that you can just consistently keep going to donor after donor after donor and be like, hey, we need more money for the charter plane for the volleyball team, or we need more money for the softball team or baseball team, track and field, wrestling, men's golf. How do you keep doing this? So it also wouldn't shock me if in 5 or 6 years, it's like, hey, we have to autocorrect. We have to revert back to what it was, just from a monetary value. So I also think there's something to be said, and if you can wait long enough, maybe the avalanche reverses itself and everyone starts coming back going, hey, we need to find at least some sort of regionality to this sport so that we can afford to pay for all these other sports.
Well, and if you also remember too, a couple of years ago with the Premier League and the Bundesliga and La Liga, which is La Liga is in Spain, the Bundesliga is the German, and then obviously the Premier League is the English clubs. They all had this idea. The TV networks wanted to do this, but tradition reigned supreme back there. But those people also care about their soccer like it's life or death as well. So there was a major push to avoid this, giant mega conference that, the Sky Sports and all those, TV networks, in Europe we're looking for. So, maybe, like Will just said, the blizzard gets too much and, it's time to revert back.
They might be doing the same amount of travel going from England to Germany as all these schools from the West Coast are going to have to do going from West Coast to East Coast now.
Right. It's a big deal. It's not super fun when Boston College has to come to Pullman and they have to play the 7:30 game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 10:30 their time.
And even just bringing up the timing slots too. It's like, why wouldn't the ACC, obviously they have Cal and Stanford is that late coast timing, but it's surprising that many of these conferences, aren't looking to add every time. So it's just a shame that there's no more Pac-12 after dark after this year. It's a tough one to think about.
I think USC fans after last week would disagree.
Fraudulent. Jed Fish, man, go for it, dude. Come on. What are we doing here?
Let's see here. I had something. So one more thought is if Washington State and Oregon State were to settle on this, then that means that the Pac-12 is gone. So
not necessarily. I mean,
because they're settling on all the Pac-12 assets.
Yeah,
so
but
technically,
they're gonna want to keep the Pac-12's name, image, stuff of that nature. So I think it's more so in this settle process. It's like Arizona and the Oregons and whoever else is like, these are our NCAA tournament shares. We put our teams into the NCAA tournament over the years. We want this. We want that. You guys want to keep the sake of the conference? That's what mediation's here for. We have no idea what it could be. But, as Mitt said, you kind of expect to have some sort of compromise sooner or later, or, we'll pose the question to him as well. How long could this go?
Mm-hmm.
And then one of other Mitt's other tweets, it's regarding NIL money. He's an NIL lawyer, but he states that Oklahoma State football coach Mike Gundy says that schools should focus on raising NIL money instead of money for facilities. So it's just everything is changing across the landscape, because this article that he quotes, like, some players know that they're not going to go to the NFL, so they'd rather go to some school that's going to pay them a certain amount of money, whatever it is. And they don't care if there's new shiny equipment or new jerseys, but if they're getting a paycheck, then they're going to go do that. So,
yeah, I mean, I bet you this year, Penix and Bo Nix, I would almost guarantee made more money in NIL than they would have in their rookie contracts, because let's face it, they weren't going to be first round picks. Penix might have been a day 2 guy, but Bo's probably a day 3 guy. And everyone jokes like Brock Purdy's poor. Brock Purdy's not poor. But, $800K is what he's making right now on his rookie deal. Do you think that Michael Penix is making more than $800K? Because I think he is. And I would think that Bo Nix is too. I bet you that there are some freshman quarterbacks, Dante Moore, who are making more than $800K because of their NIL deal. The rumor is the Tennessee kid, Laliva, he's making $8 million, over the course of his 3 or 4 years over at Tennessee. So when I look at this kind of stuff, why not? Why wouldn't it go into more NIL money? Because before it made sense to have the coolest facilities, have the coolest weight room, have the nicest weight room, have a restaurant where only your guys eat, have a cafeteria where it's just your guys, have the best dorms and stuff like that. Well, now to me, if you're telling me you can pay me and you can get me an F-150 and I can make $2 million, a year because I'm going out and absolutely dominating for your university, I could give a damn if I'm working out outside, if I'm lifting tires, or I've got one travel suit and that is what it is. If I can get more money and I can get that money back to my family, back to my parents, build a future for myself, why wouldn't that matter to me more?
You could just take that $2 million and, maybe buy Chipotle with that every day and call it good. I'd be just as happy.
Or get the free Chipotle.
Shadur Sanders.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect example of NIL. That guy's not going to go into the draft this year, even though he can. He's going to make $5 to $10 million at Colorado next season, and be, on the tip of everybody's mouth in the college football circle. Nobody can, stop talking about Colorado, and why not? I mean, Deion's obviously done a ton in terms of just his own marketing coming in there.
Caleb Williams would be going too far then, though, with that, right? There's no way that he stays.
I would be shocked. He's thrown it out there. But the way the NFL works, you're on a pay scale. And when you're the number 1 overall pick, that signing bonus is fat. So
I heard like 9 million or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, I think it's more than that.
More.
Is it?
It's much more than that.
Who's the number 1 season? Look up.
I think Devon Witherspoon for the Seahawks was 6th and his entire contract was fully guaranteed.
Was it Bryce Young? Look up Bryce Young's signing bonus.
I bet it's more. I bet it's more
Wow.
than you think.
That is really
Yeah.
surprising. Wow. Bryce Young,
20?
24.6 million.
Yep.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. All his.
Because
Devin
that's
Witherspoon.
what you care about.
Devin Witherspoon, cornerback, number 5 overall, 20 million.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think his full contract itself is guaranteed as well, at least the first 4 years, because he has the team option on the 5th. But so that means he's probably got 30 million or so total that's fully guaranteed. When you're going to be a first round pick, it makes sense to go out.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
With Shador, you got the extra year. You might as well stay because May's going to go in and Williams.
Yeah.
You have a shot to be number 1 in that class.
Yeah.
Might as well stay.
There's a lot of good QBs that, in May, Williams. I'm obviously missing a couple. But yeah.
Penix, so Cam Ward's definitely going to stick around then.
It would make sense to me.
Yeah, but does he stick around at WSU? That's the real question, though. So
yeah, I guess these next few months will play a part in that.
That's why I'm going to plug it right here. Coug 1890 Club, $18.90 a month. You can make a change as an alum. All right, the NIL. Coug 1890 Club.
1890 Club.
Yeah, Central got me when they gave the donate Central, and it was a picture of me in my football uniform. I had to donate. You can't not donate. If you want Will Ortner to donate, you just put a picture of me in there. I'll donate. I don't even care what it's to. UW, WSU, Oregon State, picture of me. I got it.
All right, real quick. Let's talk about a couple of matchups this weekend, and then we'll get you out of here. Oregon versus UW.
Foul versus Fur. It's going to be a great game. I think these are the 2 top teams right now in the Pac-12, just from a completeness standpoint. When you watch both these teams play, their defenses have vastly improved from the year before, and then offensively, they fly around and make plays. Special teams-wise, Odunze has a couple punts that he's ran back, a couple different kicks. And then Oregon, they do it a little bit differently because they've got all sorts of trickeration. Both teams are on a bye week. You're getting college game day, so the atmosphere is going to be crazy. It wouldn't shock me if this game actually started out a little bit slow just because you have 2 teams feeling each other out. But I think you're going to see a lot of trickeration. Oregon, especially in the special teams, Dan Lanning likes to throw a lot of trickeration coming out with, against Colorado, he had the fake punt. Last year against UCLA, he had the early onside kick. I don't necessarily think that you're going to see that from Coach Stein's offense. But I do think that you are going to see a lot of trickeration from the special teams. And then UW, I think offensively, DeBoer is going to dial up some trickeration plays, just trying to find the way to get the ball into Odunze, Polk, and McMillan's hands as much as he possibly can, especially in space. Those guys, I don't care how improved Oregon secondary has been, which it has, trying to stop those guys in space, that's just a mother bear to deal with. It's going to be a great game. It's going to be an old-fashioned shootout. It just might start out a little slow, and honestly, I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the OCDC matchup of Tosh versus Grubbs, and just kind of seeing, like Will said, I think there's going to be a lot of feeling each other out early on, and obviously Oregon losing the running back. Help me out with the name.
Noah Whittington.
Obviously, they've got a ton of running backs at their disposal there. So I don't necessarily expect them to not skip a beat running the football. But yeah, 2.5 point spread. It's Vegas is calling it a close game. And typically what, Vegas gives the home team it's an automatic 3 points. So they look at this as a pretty evenly matched game. If you take away that 3. So yeah, obviously, the winner of this game is controlling their own destiny to the Pac-12 championship.
Yeah, I really do think this game is going to boil down to, can UW make Oregon one-dimensional? If Oregon has issues running the football, then I think UW has a chance to win this football game, especially if they can turn Oregon over a couple times. But Oregon's ability to run the football at about a 40% percentage rate next to their 60% pass is going to be huge, because then UW's defense has to prepare and be able to stop both the run and the pass. And they like to do a lot of play action passing with Bo Nix, get him out in space to where he can choose to throw the ball or run the ball. If they take away that ability, if UW can stop Bucky Irving and Jordan James, and they can beat up on that O-line that they run about 8 deep over at Oregon, and you have to see Oregon sling the rock the entire time, that's where I think Oregon would have a little bit of issues, not because of Bo Nix, but because where UW, they are deep at that wide receiver position. You have 2 guys who are probably going to be first-round picks in Odunze and McMillan. And then you've got Polk, who's absolutely blown up this year in the slot. He's a stud. At Oregon, you have Troy Franklin, who is your number 1 true stud. Guy is a beast. You look at the other wide receivers, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant Jr., Tez Johnson, and even your tight end in Ferguson. A lot of these guys have had flashes of brilliance, but none of them have had true sustained, hey, that's the number 2 guy. Tez Johnson has a big game. Then the next week, Gary Bryant has a big game. Then Terrence Ferguson has a big game. Trayshawn Holden had a big game against Hawaii. So if you are able to force Oregon to throw the football and you can bracket cover Troy Franklin, all of a sudden I think it gets a little dicey on, can you truly trust one of those next guys to step up? Oregon's going to say that they think they can, and they have those guys, but I don't think it's been truly proven yet against the kind of talent that UW has. So if UW can stop the run, that's where things are going to get really dicey for Oregon.
Yeah, it's going to be a great matchup. Another one, USC and Notre Dame. Are we going to see USC show their maybe true colors? They've had shaky past couple weeks against Arizona and then against Colorado the week before that. Arizona State, it was close against USC. Are we going to see Notre Dame show USC who they really are?
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I mean, Oregon.
Got you on the brain.
Yeah, right. Notre Dame is coming off a tough loss on the road against Louisville, a bit of a surprising one. And for them, like, they don't really have a path anymore to the college football playoff. I mean, yeah, maybe if they, beat up on USC and they just need a ton of, luck moving forward from everybody else. It's like kind of a prove it game for them, like in terms of just, bragging rights of such a decorated rivalry. I think you could probably put it top 3 or top 5, obviously in college football of all time rivalries. But USC is going to face their stiffest, best defense they've seen yet under Marcus Freeman and company. So I think the key for Notre Dame is going to be, hey, can they establish the run game, which shouldn't be too hard against USC, control the clock, and then have that defense maybe able to muster a turnover or 2 on Caleb Williams and company. But, Caleb Williams is just so far ahead of any other quarterback in college football right now that he makes up for so many deficiencies that USC has, that he's just always going to have them in the game. But, obviously being on the road, you saw how close that Ohio State Notre Dame game was earlier this year. It took Ohio State to the final second to win that game. So, this is a definite trap game, could be the first loss that USC gets. And then, when you kind of take a look at the schedule that USC is going to have going forward after this Notre Dame game, they go at Notre Dame, home versus Utah, at Cal, home versus Washington, at Oregon, and home versus UCLA. I mean, that is, looking like a tough road to sledding up ahead. But I've got USC by a score.
This is the classic Will Ortner gets screwed game, because I've been sitting here beating the drum for Sam Hartman all year. Hey, he's a sneaky Heisman candidate. He's dominating at the beginning of the year. If he has a good game against Ohio State, you better watch out. And then he lays an absolute egg against Ohio State. All of a sudden, he lays an egg against Duke. He looked like crap against Louisville. I'm out on Sam Hartman. This is where he screws me, and he goes off for 400 yards and he just throws 1,000 touchdowns to Tobias Mayweather. And all of a sudden, well, we were holding on to some stuff, but we didn't want to use it just in case he got hurt. It's like Justin Herbert back in the Mario Cristobal days with the Ducks. As soon as the Ducks were eliminated, as soon as they got that second loss, then all of a sudden, hey, let's let Herbert run. And all of a sudden, it's a game changer. And, oh, he looks like a Heisman candidate. He looks like a really good player. Too bad it's too late. This is classic where I get screwed, and I know it because I'm going to come in here right now, and I'm going to tell you, because I have a dumb football brain, but I'm going to say USC overlooked Arizona. They didn't think much of them. They sleptwalked through that first half. They looked like garbage. Then Caleb Williams decided to put the crown on his head and went out and absolutely brought them back to a life-changing, season-changing win in overtime, which is still stupid that they do 2-point conversions after the third one. Don't get me started on that. But he finds a way to bring them back and win, and I'm going to say, you know what? I think USC is going to put up enough points. It doesn't matter that their defense gives up a bunch of points because I don't think this Notre Dame's offense is very good anymore. I think they might score like 28. Do you think 28 is enough to beat this USC team? Probably not. And then I'm going to come in here on Tuesday, and I'm going to have tears, and I'm crying because I lost because USC didn't put up a single point, and they got blown out by 28. But I think USC is going to win.
How do you really feel?
I'm going to get screwed. And I know it, and I see it coming, and it is what it is.
That's going to be a great game. Yeah, Caleb Williams has 22 touchdowns to 1 interception right now.
Yeah, I don't see how he doesn't become the second ever college football player to be a 2-time Heisman winner.
He's so much further advanced than everybody else. And the throws that he can make with the body angles that he can make, it's ridiculous. This USC team is probably an 8-4 team, but because you have Caleb Williams, he's not just giving you one victory, he's probably giving you 2 or 3. And to have a player like that, like a great player, gives you one extra victory that you don't deserve. He might give you 2 or 3, and that might be just enough to get them into a Pac-12 championship game. And shoot, I'm not going to root against them. If you're telling me you got to pick a defense to stop these guys, I'm not going to claim that it's going to be anyone because he didn't show up for 2 quarters, showed up for the third and the fourth, and that was enough to win. And that Arizona team is going to knock someone off that they shouldn't.
Let me ask you this. Is UCLA's defense for real?
Oh,
Yeah.
They look for real.
Without a doubt. They are long, athletic, and they can do it all.
They had their defensive linemen standing up pre-play the entire game. Washington State had no clue what was coming. They threw all different types of defensive schemes at them. They just couldn't get anything going. They're going up against Oregon State this weekend.
The amoeba. How weird is that we're talking about a Chip Kelly-led team, and we go, hey, they're pretty scary because of their defense. Like, you never thought you would say that. And the thing about it is if he can keep recruiting defensive players at this rate, I believe in Dante Moore. I think that kid is legit. There is a reason he was one of the top, if not the top, football quarterback recruit on most rankings and most boards. He's a big deal, and he is the real deal. Dante Moore is going to be
depth chart, though. According to the depth chart, Garbers is top QB on that depth chart this week. We'll see, what happens on Saturday. But obviously he's had a little bit of a rough go of it the last couple of weeks.
They have 6 QBs on their roster right now.
That is so Chip Kelly.
You gotta have a bunch, right?
Well, they're running back.
I mean, shoot, Oregon State doesn't have really any.
Their running back looked really good. Also, Carson Steele, I think is who it was. He was just running through guys.
The transfer, yeah. Kid was I think he was at Ball State before, if I remember right. He was at one of the small MAC CUSA schools. He's a stud. Oregon State, I like that they're starting to throw Aiden Childs in as a change of pace. It's still DJ's team, and it's very clear that they are going to use DJ until the wheels fall off. They're basically using this as a training year for Aiden Childs, but I think that's really smart. He's come in and impressed me. He's the only one that's impressed me as a freshman QB more than Dante Moore, who's gotten serious time because, we've seen a couple different freshman quarterback or young quarterbacks get into games this year because of injuries. Aiden Childs is the real deal. but I think it would be foolhardy for some Oregon State fans to start asking for him to get more time. Give him the 2 or 3, every third series he gets a series of his own to spell DJU, to give teams something else that they have to think about. But I'll tell you what, the future's bright for Oregon State with that kid.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys' time. I think that'll do it for this week's. We'll see you next Tuesday evening, and we'll see if there's any other legal updates that we can give on the Pac-12.
I guess we're not going to talk about Wazoo.
Yeah, we could talk about Wazoo. I was gonna say, I mean, it's Arizona for real too, because they put it up against USC. They put it up against UW. It was a really close game.
I completely agree with what Will said. They are going to beat someone that's not supposed to be, and I'm very, very nervous this week.
Homecoming in Pullman.
Yeah, and I said this last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago when we had our WSU's biggest swing game of the year was UCLA. Your first road game, if you can win that, you come back home, you get Arizona, and then you go out.
Bye.
Yeah, and obviously UCLA and WSU both had buys going into this past game, but I mean, Ben Arbuckle and Cam Ward, that UCLA defense was doing circles around those two. I was at the game live. It was hot. It was probably, feeling like 100 degrees on the field, just boiling in the Rose Bowl. But I mean, to have the game on the line, down 8, fourth quarter, and you need 1 yard, mind you not, you've called a timeout. So you're coming out of a timeout and you line up out of freaking shotgun to try and get 1 yard. It's ridiculous. It was a fireable fence. Obviously that's, I'm being a little bit too modest there, but
no, I agree. Fire him. Season's done. Fire him.
No, he's gonna get a bag from some Power 4 school this offseason, so he'll be gone anyways. But it's just unfortunate to me that it's like your whole scheme at Wazoo for the past decade, they haven't really changed it. Yes, they brought in a couple tight end looks here, but it's still spread the ball out. And if you're gonna line up out of shotgun or the gun, at least throw it. I mean, they brought out the Philly special, tush push, whatever you want to call it, and they scored a touchdown against Oregon State off that. Why not bring that back out? But Jaden DeLora, former WSU guy, obviously I don't know how he still has a job at quarterback, from an ethos standpoint as well as a gameplay standpoint. He thought he was going to lose his job to the freshman there, but it was announced that he is going to start. So it's going to be interesting to see. He has the ability to, really be dynamic in the passing game, or also be an absolute cancer in the passing game. So it's going to be interesting to see how WSU takes shape into defending Jacob Cowan and just an improved team all across the board, where Arizona is starting to feel like, okay, hey, we can win these games. Now, they haven't really done it yet. So like Jake Dickert said earlier this week, we got our slice of humble pie, and it's going to be how are they going to react, because Oregon is looming, and the last thing they need to be thinking about is any sort of game against the Ducks and getting out of Arizona and sticking in the top 20 and going into Oregon 5-1.
Yeah, I think when you look at this game, you're going to know how both teams feel in the first quarter. If Wazoo is still stuck on the UCLA loss, and to be frank, if Arizona's still stuck on the USC loss, that's a back-breaking loss there for Arizona. Now, I do think that they're going to beat someone that they probably shouldn't. I don't know if it's WSU. I don't know if it's Colorado, who they have later on. I don't know if maybe they sneak up and beat a Utah or an Oregon State, a UCLA, someone of that nature, right? I'd have to go through their schedule. But Arizona would scare me in the Pac-12. They are just that perfect level of, hey, they're probably not a bowl team, so do we really have to get up for this game right away? Maybe I don't watch as much film this week. Maybe I take a little bit of a break here. I don't need to study up on what their third down blitz tendencies are. It's those kind of tricks right there that come up all the time with college football teams, where this Arizona team is the perfect team to take advantage of it. I mean, you saw it against USC. USC sleptwalked through 2 quarters. Now, they have the best college football player in the most important position on the field, and that's why they were able to win that game. Wazoo doesn't have that type of guy. Now, I'm not saying that Wazoo is going to come out and sleepwalk through this game. I'd be a little bit surprised the way that Dickert coaches this team. I think they come out pissed off and firing. But I also think this Arizona team comes out pissed off and firing because they should have had a big win against USC. Frankly, they could have had a big win against UW. They were in that game the entire way. And really, they shut down that passing attack better than anybody else has this year. So if I'm Wazoo and if I'm Arizona and I'm a big fan, I know right away in that first quarter, because you're going to be able to tell it on the body language of the coaches, and you're going to be able to certainly tell it on the body language of the players and how inspired they come out and play. If either one of those teams comes out and they're playing uninspired, it's going to be a long game. And I know you guys are both Coug fans, and I would hate to leave you without trolling you at least a little bit. But doesn't this make for the perfect Couging it scenario? It's homecoming. It's a later game. It's an Arizona team that probably shouldn't play with you. You had high hopes. Your hopes just got taken away a little bit with the UCLA loss, to at least where now you're like, we have to be perfect the rest of the way. Isn't this the perfect Coug it scenario?
I don't know what that word means. I've never heard it.
That's not in our vocabulary.
Not in our vocabulary. And all the Cougs out there that still have that in their vocabulary need to turn their Coug card in. I'll be
you
real.
Can tweet
hey,
at me. Yeah, I'll take all the tweets. I'll take all the firestorm. Bring it on.
Hey, great thing. It's at home, and we have dog walked Arizona for the last decade. So that's kind of how I'll look at it. But, hey, like Fraternal Cloud's saying right now, Arizona's coming off an emotional 3 overtime loss with a freshman quarterback. Take the Cougs and the points. I'm a little nervous on the 8. It opened up at 9.5, and it's already gone down to 8. So, over
Cougs under
money
59.
line. If I could give you any sort of advice for Eternal Cloud, just take the money line.
There we have it. Well, thanks, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun college football to see this weekend. It'll be fun to recap it on Tuesday.
Awesome.
So thank you all for watching, for commenting, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Connor.